This is the session on energy startups, and we have an amazing panel, and our mission is to talk about hot startups, which ones are getting traction or not, what policies might be helpful or not to such startups, and how can we encourage energy innovation using startups. And what we're going to do is we're going to just go down the line, and we're going to ask each panelist to briefly introduce themselves and to make one point, to make one proposition, and then we'll discuss these propositions. And hopefully you'll have some questions. And at 3 something we'll end, probably, when you stop asking questions. Okay, is that all right with you all? Let me start with, I'll set an example by starting. So my name is Bob Metcalfe. I'm professor of innovation at the University of Texas. I was an internet tycoon, but then I started investing in energy for 10 years at Polaris Venture Partners in Waltham, Massachusetts. Enertech, I used to call it, as if it were similar to biotech, nanotech, infotech, intertech. It turned out it wasn't at all similar. So now here I'm in Austin, and my mission is helping Austin to become a better Silicon Valley, that is to encourage startups by the professors and students at the University of Texas at Austin. And my point is this. There was for a while the theory that we needed a new kind of capital to fund energy startups because they required so much money and they took so much time to scale up. We needed a new kind of capital, that the old-fashioned venture capital wasn't good enough. And my point is that that's wrong. That is, the old kind of venture capital is just fine. What we need is for the incumbents in the energy industry to learn how to use startups and venture capital as part of their innovation systems. And I'm pleased to report that's actually happening. That is, the incumbents are now, in many more cases than before, partnering effectively with startups. So that's my intro and my point. Please.
Great. Thanks, Bob. Thank you for using your cards, too, so I can do the same. Keep me on point. My name is Simone. I'm CEO and founder of a company here in Austin called ClearBlade. It's not hardware, software. ClearBlade is a technology startup. We built a mobile and Internet of Things backend, connecting devices to the cloud and existing systems. I cut my teeth as a programmer back in the late 80s on mainframe air traffic control and hospital systems at companies like IBM and Johns Hopkins. I'm an active angel investor here in town and try to mentor when I'm lucky enough that some of these smart startups will listen to me. You can fit most of what I know about smart grid on the back of a cocktail napkin, so I may be kind of an odd person on this panel. However, I do know a bit about infrastructure. And that's the software and the bits and the data side of this equation, which has to marry what's out there already. It's obvious that cloud, mobile, Internet of Things is changing everything at a rapid pace, and smart grid is going to be part of that equation. The existing infrastructure that's there is not going away anytime soon. So we need to integrate the new, the old, and everything in between in real time to make this work. So that's my point.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Bartosz, Wojszczyk, and I'm actually from Seattle, not from Austin. I think most of the speakers are here from Austin. I'm co-founder and CEO of Decision Point Global. It's a company that works with startups, incubators, to basically accelerate to market within 24 months. We don't look for any technologies. We look at the technologies on two criteria. One is company has to have technology or business at least 2 or 3 technological generations ahead of the peers. The reason for that is that technology is evolving so fast that in many cases the new startups, by the time they commercialize today, they're already outdated. So we try to avoid that. And second of all, we look at the X performance factor technologies, which is at least 2 times improvement compared to the peers. So we have right now a very sweet and nice portfolio of technologies that if they come in the market in the next 24 months, they will definitely shake up some of the energy stuff. Before that, I used to be Chief Innovation Officer for one of the largest energy companies in Asia. And the goal was very simple, to innovate the business, to take it from about 300 million core net income to 1 billion over 7 years. We almost done it. And before that, I was head of strategy for GE. But right now, it's basically working with energy clean tech type startups around disruptive type innovation. My point is, according to various statistics, most of the startups, or about 70% of startups in the energy space, fail by the 5th year of operation, which means our rate of success in the energy technology startups is extremely low. There are different reasons, but it sucks because in most of the startups there is a lot of personal vested interest. People put personal capital, they put lives and families on hold to do startups. So how do we go about increasing that rate, or overall increasing the rate of success for startups and young organizations?
Hi, my name is Becky Taylor, and the story about the glasses is I will spare you the details, but I'm not an escapee from South by Southwest Film. I'm not a film dealer. The eyes behind these glasses are pink, puffy, itchy, and sensitive to light, and I'll leave the rest to you guys to think about. I am a serial entrepreneur. I've been in Austin since the mid-'80s. Back in the day when I was working on air traffic control systems, I was doing things in a similar vein, but focused on real-time process control. The startups that I founded throughout most of the 90s and 2000s were very much focused on mobile devices and other related areas. So as far as infrastructure, I'm quite familiar with networking in lots of different arenas. I kind of started to semi-retire a couple years ago when I ran across these two charming gentlemen from Shell Oil at an event in London. And they were in the process of setting up Shell Technology Ventures, which is, best we can tell, the best funded corporate venture group in the oil and gas patch. Shell is all over the open innovation front, and that's the message I wanted to share today. I've been there just about 2 years, and MIT named Shell one of the 50 most innovative companies a couple of years ago. But I think the better metric is what I heard through the grapevine last week when we were at South by Southwest Interactive, which is in an unrelated session that no one from Shell either participated in or attended. Shell was deemed the oil and gas company that gets innovation at South by Interactive. We're still trying to trace the source of that quote because we'd really like to know who it was that said that. So in its first full year of operations, the venture, we closed 11 deals last year. It's about an even mix of, we're very focused on finding technologies that can help improve Shell's ability in the exploration, production, and refining areas of its current business. But we are also making investments in the post-fossil fuel arena, so we do look at renewable energy technologies, and we have made some investments in that space. I'm delighted to be here on the panel today. A couple of if we're going to talk about real startups, I'll hold those if you want me to until later, but there are real examples. One Austin company that we invested in last year is a company by the name of Vero Systems, and they're a wonderful example of the first type of company that we're looking for actively, and that is they have a way to predict pump failure much more accurately and with more lead time than currently is the case. And for a deep water rig that's drilling through 12,000 feet of water and then 20,000 feet below the surface, being able to predict when you might have to replace a pump that's at the bottom of that hole is a really big deal. So it'll have a huge impact on cost because it's millions of dollars per day, and it's multiple days when you have something like that happen that you aren't able to plan for. Hi guys. I can't really see you now. I didn't know we had an audience. Maybe you can stand up and talk to the Q&A. So, with that, I'm happy to, looking forward to the conversation. But again, Shell is all over figuring out how to work with new innovation partners. And I'm in a new role, which Shell's never had before. As of the first of the year, I moved into being their first technology innovation advisor. They've had technology advisors, but my particular goal is to find startups and other new kinds of partners. Maybe it's at universities, maybe it's at national labs, where we can collaborate on bringing new interdisciplinary solutions to bear on some of Shell's problems. So I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Good afternoon, my name is Dave Carolan. I'm with the Solid Green Companies and Build Hero. And my story is that we try to convince the building industry to build smart net zero buildings, and we haven't had a lot of success doing that. It's taken a while to determine why that is, and so I just wanted to take a few minutes and explain that to you and hopefully make a point about innovation and how we see it. So We have a series of companies. We manufacture a wall and roof panel system that's made out of what you might know as styrofoam and light gauge steel. It's very insulative, and it helps you get quickly to low energy consumption for heating and cooling. So we are a manufacturer, and we're in the building material space. We also are in the building science space, so we invent things and we have patents on things, and we like doing that and interacting with the geeky building science guys out there working in the building industry. And then I have a long history in the software space, especially financial software. So over the years, over the last 5 or 6 years, as we began to try to push builders to take a more active role and pursue as a goal zero energy, net zero energy building, we got a tremendous amount of pushback. And so over the last 14 months, we've spent time trying to discover what was needed in that industry. So my point is really this, and by way of example, is that we thought we knew what the problem was in the industry, but that we just were dealing with a bunch of symptoms. So over 14 months, we think we've identified what the problem is in the building industry, and it came back in a couple of ways. Builders aren't willing to pay for anything other than their first cost. And the second point was, even though consumers are interested in energy, they don't know what energy savings means, and they are interested in home automation, but they really don't understand what it means to save energy. And then we finally discovered that manufacturers spend all their money and risk lots of capital to invent things, and developers do, and they're willing to pay to see changes in the energy market. So my point is this: if you, as a startup, if you think that you're solving a problem, make sure it really is one. We really just looked at symptoms, and eventually we found that the problem was that manufacturers wanted to connect to builders and consumers in an effective way and influence their decision on making low energy, low water, and sustainability. So we spent a lot of money and a lot of time to finally get to a point where we could begin building our application that connects all those parties together, and realizing that our customers actually manufacturers, and we had thought of as builders.
Hello, I'm George Koutitas. I'm coming from Greece. I'm a new person here in Austin, Texas, a new entrepreneur. So I'm one of the entrepreneurs that leave their own countries and came here to make a successful business, hopefully make Austin a better place than Silicon Valley. I hope I'm going to help on that. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Gridmates. Gridmates is an internet platform designed to improve, to energize the lives of people that need our help. It's in the area of transactive energy, a new sector in the smart grid technology, and we focus on energy poverty. So imagine that the last time that you had a blackout and you didn't have electricity in your house, how panicked you were. In the United States, there are approximately 40 million people that face this problem. The problem that they cannot afford to pay for their electricity needs. For utilities, this is translated to revenue losses or administrative costs for service disconnections. So the problem is both on the customer level and also on the utility level. And what we do is we leverage internet technologies in order to provide an easy and immediate solution to this problem. So with Gridmates, you can select any amount of energy or dollar. We are responsible to convert it in real time. See the impact of this amount of energy to the household that you're going to help, and then click Send Energy. So it's one line on your screen. Energy, dollar amount, electricity, and impact, and click to Send Energy. The business model behind it, it's different types of applications. For example, you can think of it like energy roaming services, or sharing electricity with friends and family from prosumers, producers of electricity. But we now focus as a startup to provide the solution to the problem, not the symptom, which is energy poverty. As an entrepreneur, also as a foreign-born entrepreneur, I took the decision to come in Austin because I did my mathematics, and if you want to succeed, you need to leave your comfort zone. For me, the comfort zone was my academic work in Greece, a scholarship on a postdoc that I had from the European Union, my car, my friends. And I realized that I need to leave this comfort zone in order to increase the probabilities of success. So where should I land? San Francisco, New York, or Austin? And I took the decision to land in Austin because it's your comfort zone outside your comfort zone. So I landed in a nice place that provides a good way of living, all the probabilities for a great success. I've been here for about 1 year. We found angel investors, a small network of angel investors. Now we are in the process of raising more money, and hopefully I'm going to be an angel investor in the future like you.
Well, thank you very much. So the goal of...
The point. Sorry to interrupt.
You didn't make your point.
I didn't make the point.
Please make your point.
I didn't make the point. So what we do now is we are creating the world's first community powered by crowdsourced energy. It's a village here in Austin, Texas with 200 homeless individuals. And what we do is we facilitate energy donations for them. So the point is, type any amount you want, see your impact, and then click send energy. This is the point that I want to ask for today.
Thank you. So the goal of this session is to talk about startups and energy innovation, and what just leapt out is that energy is a very strange category. It is so diverse. You know, we have all sorts of startups, so it's almost difficult to discuss them because there's so different pumps at the bottom of the ocean. In my case, my current investment is a company that makes solar wafers, completely different from pumps. So how, dare I ask what you all think are the hot startups? Or the answers could be so varied. Anyone have a hot startup? You've already told us about your hot startup.
Well, there's one that's literally hot. I could describe it. I like to use this as an example because it's the intersection of renewable energy technology and more traditional fossil fuel technologies. We invested in a company called GlassPoint. It was our first investment about a year and a half ago. And GlassPoint does concentrated solar power creation. And Shell is using it not to generate electricity, but to generate steam that we then use to recover more oil from and gas from our existing reservoirs, which is extremely important to be able to do because it's a lot more invasive and expensive to drill multiple wells as opposed to figure out how to drill one well and then do a better job of recovering oil from that one well. So we went to one of Shell's largest projects is in Oman, and we put in an installation that creates many millions of pounds of steam per day. And it's had a massive impact on the operations of that particular facility, so much so that the Omani government took the decision to put $35 million into the company last summer. And this one also has the potential to really change the game for the country because what we were using prior to the creation of steam using solar was we were using natural gas to burn, to turn the turbines, etc. And so that's freed up many, many, many millions of cubic feet of natural gas for the Omani government to use to stimulate different parts of their economy from a manufacturing perspective. So I like to talk about that. It's much larger and later stage than maybe what we're here to talk about, but I love it because it really does show the intersection of an energy company using renewable technologies in a very interesting way.
Another one here.
So we have a company actually who combines energy with the telecommunication, and the principle is very simple. Nikola Tesla, he never had a chance to prove, but he had a theory that actually you can transfer power wirelessly. And at that time where he lived, there was not even a technology available to prove his hypotheses. And we have one company actually here in North America, here in Texas, who is on the verge of basically discovering and doing a vertical innovation of transferring power to the point that they proved that the waveforms that Tesla predicted can transfer the power exist, and they measure it. And then now they're in the process of determining how much power in the context of kilowatt, megawatt can be transferred.
How far away are point A and point B?
Right now it's in the range of 10 miles. And interestingly, since the US regulation in the energy space and telecommunication space is sometimes not very user-friendly for this type of innovation, actually we'll be doing the first test beds in Mojave Desert, where we'll be building a power plant, and we'll be trying to figure out how far we can take the power beyond the 10 miles, of course. And hopefully we'll have a first demonstration by the end of this year and commercialization next year. So again, it's something disruptive, something that takes an energy discussion a completely different dimension than what we are used to.
Thank you. Let me add, so I'm on the board of a company called 1366, which is a solar power startup. And it does the following cool thing. You know, wafers for solar cells are made with, you make a block of silicon typically, and then you cut it with a saw. And that wastes, right away, wastes half the silicon because the saw is as thick as the wafers are. So you have all the, it's called a kerf. So half the silicon is wasted, cannot be recycled because it's contaminated by the blade of the saw. This company doesn't saw its wafers. It just has this fixture that goes into molten silicon and plucks out a wafer and puts it over here like a cookie. It just goes like this. So there's no sawing, so it'll reduce the cost of wafers by 60%. Called 1366. Why is it called 1366?
That's how many watts there are per square meter?
At the outside of the atmosphere.
Correct.
Yes, so it's only a, yeah, the professor involved keeps telling me the solar, this is called the solar constant, and it's not constant. Another startup. Anyone here?
Based on my research, I'm an IT person, so all my background is on computer science, telecommunication, and smart grids. So I think that most of the startups that are focused on the customer and services to the customer, they have more competition, of course, but these are the companies that I think that in the next generation of the smart grid, they are going to provide a lot of new services and business models to utilities. Because in the generation, in the distribution, it's hard to have a startup company because it's a difficult business. You need to have a lot of initial costs. But in terms of services, it is easy for you to think of a new service, create a mobile app, define a new business model and different channels of revenue, and propose that to the utility. So I think that companies that are focused on the Smart Grid 3.0, the third generation of the Smart Grid, which is user-centric, and we are going to have the evolution of virtual power plants, prosumer networks. I think this is the area that we're going to see a lot of new ways of technology coming.
Thank you. David, how do you build a net zero energy building? What's the secret there? Is that just lots of insulation or solar power, or you bury it in the ground?
Yes, all those things.
All
Lots
those.
of installations. It's boring, but it's the key to get to zero energy. If you have a well-insulated home, if you're familiar with Passive House as a standard, it's probably the apex of insulation. It's relatively expensive to build a passive home because of the large amount of lumber and insulation and time. But in order to reach zero energy effectively, you have to have lots of insulation. You have to integrate lots of different technologies together. So you have to understand how they interact. And then you have to be constantly aware of price points. And that's just the beginning.
Well, what would be an example of a technology that you just said, a bunch of them? So I got the insulation part.
Yeah, insulation, you have many choices on water heaters, so as an example. So you're going to try to have the lowest cost water heater. You could do a solar water heater. You could do a gas instant water heater. You could do a hybrid water heater, and the list goes on.
But I'm not hearing zero energy.
But we're going to get there. So we're going to get there. So you make these choices about ways to heat water, ways to cool and heat the home, which HVAC systems, and then you're going to have some sort of alternative energy. We believe that solar's very appropriate for that here, but thermal is appropriate in some other places.
I got some wafers.
Yeah, we could do that. At the end of the day, you have to go beyond. Is this technology effective, you have to have someone to install the technology and support it. And that's where things break down in the building industry. Old school builders, your large builders, even a lot of your regional and small builders are unaware of what's available. If they actually do find something that works together, they have to have trades that actually will put that in, and then they have to support it. And frankly, it scares a lot of people away. And so in order to overcome that, they have to transfer the risk to the consumer, and that's higher prices. And so that's why we're not getting a lot of traction. We're really committed to lowering those costs, removing the risk by having more options available at the point of decision. And so in general, the whole building industry for residential building is broken along those lines. And we do believe that technology using information effectively is one way to lower that risk and lower cost.
Now, I've looked at a couple companies here in town. There's a company called Curb that puts a device on your main power source to your house that will basically read data from all the devices and be able to get that signature footprint to tell you what's on and off and feed that data back to the cloud. So that's an interesting one that I've seen. KLD Energy here in town has got some smart battery technology. They've been around for a little bit. I think they're starting to get some traction.
But they make motors. So.
Yep, motors and really battery powered. I think they're really focusing on Asia and mopeds and those sort of things. But they've got some really interesting technology. It's just always amazing to me how capital intensive these things are to design and manufacture. And you know, to me, I keep thinking about how you connect all these devices to something, right? And that's going to be an interesting problem, because think about Facebook and Google today and big data. That's going to be a bunny hill compared to once we connect all these devices and they start working through a smart grid or smarter connections. And we get the internet to more of a push technology than a pull technology. Because today, you know, we still have to go search for data. We still have to pull data. But 10 years from now, there's going to be 2,000, 3,000 or more devices in my house buzzing, popping, pinging, or doing something. I mean, how are we going to manage that? And I think that's the infrastructure behind the whole thing. So I read a quote once that someone said, hey, look, infrastructure isn't something Steve Jobs, who's probably living the iAngel right now, can hold up on stage and look at lovingly and get all of us in the room to want to buy it, because you can't see it. But it's critical for us to reach that next stage of evolution, just like the smart grid. And we have to have a higher bar for what is needed for scale and resiliency and security with all these pipes. So I think that's kind of the ghost behind the machine that you're going to start to see here over the next few years. And how do we do that?
Thank you. So we've decided we're going to finish in 25 minutes, which means you'll have time to ask questions if you like. Now, one thing I'd like to observe is, so the goal is to solve energy, and that means cheap and clean. It has to be both cheap and clean. We've learned that cheap but not clean is not so great, and clean but not cheap is not so great. So we have to have cheap and clean energy. And there's two kinds of startups we've talked about here, supply and demand. Two of us talked about producing energy, and at least three of us talked about, on the demand side, reducing the demand or redistributing the demand. So how are we going to solve energy? Are we going to solve it on the supply side or on the demand side? Does anyone want to argue about that?
Well, I would disagree with the phrase cheap. It needs to be affordable. I think the key component is that if you look at the customer behavior around consumption of energy space, very often we don't understand how customers perceive electricity as a commodity or as an added value service. When we did, in my previous job, when we did studies in Asia about electricity, in Asia, 60% populations are low income. Cost of electricity represents between 25 to 40% of their share of wallet, how much you pay for electricity. We actually discovered that if the energy is affordable with the value attached to it, there is no problem with paying a bit more on the premium side, which means we really have to understand sometimes customer behavior. It doesn't mean that the generation needs to be expensive. It doesn't mean that we cannot have aspect of consumption management, which is the demand side. But the discussion of cheap, I think we are, in many cases in the utility space, we are getting out of that discussion. We are saying, what is the value behind energy? What is the value that energy delivers? Therefore, what's the affordability of the service behind of that energy? So,
But you just heard that one of the big resistance points in net zero buildings is the builders won't pay anything extra. Anyway, this is a bit of a semantics, cheap, affordable. Sounds like you're making excuses for alternative energy being so expensive. Is that what you're doing?
what's the next question? I didn't understand this specific statement.
If anyone has any questions, they would be welcome.
If anybody's interested in looking at the future of energy, Shell has for 40 years been putting together 30 to 50-year lookouts called the scenarios. And they're apparently so well regarded that our U.S. State Department tends to like to have a look at what Shell's doing. It doesn't matter which way one looks at the future. We're going to need a lot more energy than we've figured out how to go get, no matter where it comes from. And we'd all like it to be clean, for sure. So I think, you know, if there were any improvements along the lines of reducing demand, that would be helpful. And is kind of the bottom line from these scenarios. Because again, it doesn't matter if you look at population growth trends and demands for access to energy, it's all going way up and to the right.
Well, my point of view is, not that you asked, is that the energy has to be cheap, and we're going to solve energy on the supply side. Because all the charts indicate that GNP is linear in energy. So if you want to, and there's a lot of people, 7 billion people on Earth, all want to be rich and prosperous, so that means they're going to need a lot of energy. So I don't see how you solve it on the demand side.
Yeah,
I think we just got to produce lots of cheap or affordable and clean energy.
Yeah. And one of Shell's chief scientists presented at UT's Energy Forum in February. And he has a slide that is pretty often used, which shows that over time, the number of lines representing sources of energy go from 3 or 4 oil, gas, coal, hydro, to incorporating every other known source of energy and unknown source of energy on the planet. And so I think no matter who you talk to, whether it's an old-fashioned oil and gas company or whether it's somebody that's developing the latest and greatest renewable technology, everybody agrees that the solution, I think even the president on the political side of the House, it's a portfolio of everything is going to be required, even from close to meeting energy demand. And I'm really interested in some of the startups I've seen that are generating, you know, energy to power your cell phones by, you know, walking around. And it seems to me it's going to get really local, where you generate the energy you need for the gadgets you've got on your body. To me, that's the cool stuff, is looking at how small can you make that footprint of energy generation, and how specifically focused on a particular application, such as charging cell phones, is feasible, practical, supportable, and can you build a business based on doing that?
There's a question, yes.
Eric, for all the innovation that's coming at us and everybody's solving, and David was talking about solving for, what's the problem, what are we solving for? What's missing, you know, what's an opportunity? If you're talking about startups, for anybody else there in the room to go solve for, you said, how are we going to drive all those devices? How are they going to integrate and so forth? What's missing and who goes after that void?
You know, I think we have a lot of smart engineers all around the world, especially in Austin. Everyone wants to build everything from the ground up themselves. I think what's missing is maybe some standardization on runtime, on what's going to power all of these devices. What's going to, you know, it's an interesting problem to have a back end for several thousand people or several 100,000. But you start talking millions and billions and trillions of devices, you're going to need a different way of doing things. So I think we have to start getting smarter about looking at real-time messaging, about things that are immediate and not delayed, about runtimes that used to be interesting 15, 20 years ago that came out of BEA and IBM and others that are just not sufficient. Now I'm not seeing the innovation coming out of those big companies. They're coming out of the small companies. So I think we need things like that to then connect to the point devices. And those devices have to be cheap enough to be built into these things. So it's a collaboration on all sorts of fronts. And I'm a little skeptical on the smart grid stuff because I think you've got government, you've got infrastructure, you've got companies maybe that aren't very motivated to do these things. Now I'm naive and I'm not that educated in this space, but I'm seeing, one thing I learned years ago is if there's too many moving parts, go somewhere else and try to find a solution because that's too many moving parts.
One other follow-up on that, if I could, Bob. You were talking about innovations coming out of small companies, not large companies. Small companies being really short on capital, larger companies heavier on it. There's a disconnect there. It's not going after socialism to share the solving for, but you worked for one for years, and you realize the speed with which you're running now is far different from that.
Yeah, well, I think the big companies are letting the market decide what is innovative, right? Which I think is smart, right? It's crowdsourcing to some degree. So, not that IBM doesn't innovate anymore, or Oracle doesn't innovate, they still innovate in big ways. But you can't move as fast in those big companies. We all live with rules that we didn't want to follow anymore, so that's why we basically decided to become our own bosses, and then if we fail, then we have to move cities because we lost a lot of friends' money, and so we got to move somewhere else. There's a lot of pressure on us.
The answer I would submit to your question is Ethernet.
You know anybody knows anything about that?
So, there's a special irony on Ethernet. When Ethernet first came out, they told us that no one's going to ever string wires for your new local network. You got to get the Ethernet to run on the power lines, which are everywhere. Now it's flipped, because now there's a new standard called Power over Ethernet. So instead, they were putting the power on the Ethernet lines, and I think that's really rich. Questions? Yes, sir.
Yeah, when you're talking about startups, they're fundamentally people-centric, right? A lot of investors invest in teams. So for the investors in the room, how do you get people excited to solve energy problems? And for the founders, there's a lot of different problems you could solve. Why did you choose the particular problem in the energy space that you solve?
Investors first. Investors first. How
We exist in both sides, where we look at the technology and we invest. And for us, it's very simple. First of all, we don't lack cash. We have cash for startups. What we lack is the fact that many startups really don't understand how to connect their innovation with the problem solving on the social economic side. So just to give you, we talk about renewable supply side. Today, for one of the startups, we are closing $1 billion investment on the project basis, not purely on the technology, but the project basis, which means if you have an idea where you can truly differentiate your value and you understand how to do it, the project-based financing will come. How we look at the technologies? We look at least at the technologies that don't have an incremental improvement in performance, but at least 2 times versus the peers. So we have right now one startup that is working with the City of London, replace 57 water and sewer pumps with 10 pumps at the 10 times smaller dimensions at 70% improved energy efficiency. So again, this is how we look at the technology component, and then we marry this with the money of applications that are, again, money is there. It's really not a problem to get the money if you truly know how to differentiate yourself. That's kind of my 2 cents. Thank you for business card.
Yeah, but you did raise another point, which is, will energy be solved with a silver bullet, like a desktop fusion thing? Or will it be solved with a million little things, like how to build buildings, how to pump things? Pump startups seem to be hot these days. Just today, right here.
Well, yeah, it's gonna be a lot of little things, and a couple of big things. So, one of the other companies that we found that we quite like is looking at how to do a better job of getting seismic data. And I haven't said anything yet, but big data is a big issue for Shell, as it is for oil and gas companies everywhere. Right now, every day, the seismic data acquisition that the company's involved in generates petabytes. And once you get that, where do you put it and what do you do with it? So that's one of the interdisciplinary opportunities that we hope we will uncover is other solutions and approaches to that particular type of problem in other areas where there's that much data. And our problem is only going to get to be bigger with every year that goes by because of the nature of the reservoirs we're having to go into. We need finer and finer detail about the rocks that are down there in order to figure out what to do. So the amount of data we're going to have to be able to evaluate and analyze and come to the same conclusions is going to continue to get larger and larger and larger by large percentages. This is not just like 1 or 2% a year. So it's a huge problem that's going to be becoming even larger. And so from a teaming perspective, back to the original question, the premise of the way that Shell Tech Ventures is investing and the way that I'm now looking for both startups and other innovation partners is we're looking for technologies that have multiple application potential across multiple industries so that they're not totally dependent on either Shell or oil and gas. And big data is one great example of that. When you do find those kinds of technologies, it makes recruiting a great top flight team quite a bit easier. So I don't know if that helps answer your question. But yeah, team is number one for us as far as what we look at, right up with the great technology. But yeah, team is number one.
On the topic of reservoirs, we have a startup here at UT, Professor Pope's startup, in which he has PowerPoints that actually contain the number of $1 trillion. I'm used to laughing at business plans that have $1 billion in it. This one has $1 trillion in it. And here's, in quick form, here's how he does it. There's 14 trillion barrels of oil on Earth. We've taken 1 trillion out of the ground already. We know how to get the next trillion barrels. His technology, surfactants, will give access to the 3rd trillion barrels, and at $100 a barrel, I guess it's down to 40 now, I'm sorry. But that's still $40 trillion. So we wish him luck.
I agree with your point completely, which it's going to take a bunch of small solutions and a bunch of layers. From the investor side, it's all about team. Any investment that I've ever won with has been because of team. The idea ends up being something completely different half the time. Now, the startup side of me is frustrated by this venture mentality of I need to see a point solution that takes me from A to B to C and nothing in between. That frustrates me because listen, nothing against Favor or Uber, these are great solutions, by the way. Some of these ideas aren't so simple to understand, and it's going to take multiple companies working together to solve the problem. And I don't know how to solve that one. Maybe it's I got to go to different people to understand. But I think part of it is your idea is you've got to prototype these solutions and show all the different moving parts to get them funded and then take it to another big level. Or you'll disagree.
I don't mind prototyping, but here's the dilemma. On average, prototyping in energy space takes between 2 to 5 years, depends on the complexity of the technology. By the time the prototypes sometimes are done, industry moves so far that the prototype by itself becomes obsolete. So the question is, how do we rapid prototype, some stuff that it delivers the expected value and scale within the time how the market and businesses evolve. So I have no problem with prototyping, but unfortunately, smart grid, it's a great example how we are constantly prototyping and yet not scaling, because there's constantly something new coming up. I'm not talking about Ethernet, by the way.
But scaling is the hard part. I mean, that's where all the catastrophes occur. Like Solyndra was a scaling problem. They scaled too soon, apparently. So in oil and gas, energy in general, I think scaling is the actual problem. That is, going from the prototype to scale is where most of the failures occur, and they're catastrophic because scaling is expensive. Other questions? Yes, sir.
Yeah, George. Chris Roman with SDG. I work in the Emerging Technologies Division, so we're always testing new gadgets. We have a lot of people come to us, and they always seem to fall within the same sort of category. So the question for the panel is, what do you do, or what activities, ventures might you go through to go out and actually proactively find new companies?
Say that again.
Instead of companies, we have a lot of companies come to us to test a widget, improve savings. But what do you guys do to actually proactively go out and find? Because that seems to be one of the hardest things for us is, finding a new technology versus somebody coming to us.
All right, so I was a VC for 10 years, and we ended up in the same boat that you're in. Our conceit was we were proactive in developing investment themes and promising areas, but in fact, our entire deal stream, 99% of it was over the transom. Just stuff coming in that we didn't anticipate. But I bet we have some real pros here. Let's see if they do any better.
I owe an answer to the previous question from.
Go ahead, whatever.
We heard only the investors. We need to hear the founders too. So it's true that an investor is focusing on the team, like both of the colleagues here mentioned. But they need to hear a nice story, how the idea came from, need to trust who you are, and then understand your business model in an easy way. So you need to be very clear. My personal story with the investor is that I had two different types of investors. One said, the first question is, tell me about yourself, your family, how you came up with this idea and who you are. And in 30 minutes, he told me, okay, I will invest in you. That was it. I said, that was so easy. The other investor...
Is this guy Greek by any chance?
No. The other guy, it was more like 1 month of 2 times per week off in the morning. Need to understand who I am, trust me. The business model in the beginning, he told me that it's quite difficult. So he understood the business model. So the problem was to convince him that I can make it happen. A difficult business model. So that's my point of view is that I agree that most of the investors need to see who you are, what is your idea, and that you can execute it. Because nice ideas and nice things, there exist. So execution is the biggest problem of the investors. Sorry for the interruption.
Okay, I was just going to add that you need to have domain experience. It wouldn't hurt, right, a little bit. And you need to be passionate about what you're doing, but also very humble and willing that your idea may not actually get legs. But it doesn't mean it's wasted, right? So I know companies, and I was just going to name one that you should check out, Edge Home Technologies in San Diego. It's a great company. They have 7 patents on a little chip and the ability to deal with phantom power, which is a problem. They maybe have the wrong business model to go and sell that through electricians.
What is phantom power?
It's basically power that never turns off because you have devices connected at the outlet. And it actually, there's a drain, and the more electronics that you get in your home that still needs that draw for some reason, you get, I don't say you could get more than $10 or $15, but I know some guys that have phantom energy that's in the $50 range in their home because they have so many electronics. So that's like so it seems like a small problem, but it adds up. And so Edge Home really has some great technology that'll probably end up somewhere else than in a home kit where you can convert your home to their system. And I think that the founder there is just fine with that because for the love of what he was doing, they invented and got 7 patents on this technology, and it'll end up somewhere else and it won't be wasted. And so the last point I would make is that there's a good chance that larger companies, larger manufacturers and developers will end up acquiring small companies that don't have good business models. And we have to be perfectly happy for that to happen if we want to make an impact on energy.
Can I just answer?
You're from SDG&E, am I right?
Yes, sir.
By the way, he's not paying me to say that, but actually SDG&E is probably one of the most innovative utilities in North America. And I can tell you that from the perspective, and I used to be Chief Innovation Officer for another utility, the problem is why no one comes or not when it comes to utilities, because everyone knows that you're regulated. You cannot innovate 100% in the regulated world. There's 2 opposing worlds, which means everyone knows if they will come with the new technologies, you have to build a business case, you have to go to the Public Utility Commission, you have to 3 times get rejected. After 4th time, you get the first time approval for small pilot project. And to scale it, that's another rate case that you have to provide in front of the utility. So you're to a certain degree in a disadvantage because there's plenty of companies who like to do business with utilities, but they know the inertia of investing and treating utilities as an innovation partner is, how often do you rate case? 3, 4, 5 years?
I think 3.
Every 3 years. Basically, every 3 years you have a rate case, and that's unfortunately a huge disadvantage for any utility that is regulated.
So let me add to the bad news. For years, I've been telling energy people that if you want more innovation in energy, you need less regulation. Last week, they decided to treat the internet as a utility and regulate it. That's really bad news, I think. Anyway, other questions? Yes, sir.
Hi, I'm with Power Cognition. We are applying artificial intelligence to the reliability and security of the industrial internet, including comp failure. So I was wondering, are you seeing a lot of artificial intelligence being applied within the energy sector, and where are some of the other opportunities besides reliability and security? Just wanted to get your thoughts.
I hate to be one that's talking, but actually there are a couple companies right now looking at the artificial intelligence for transactive type platforms. They're at the initial stage, but yes, they are. So I can connect you with some of them.
I want to answer this guy's question.
Which one?
DG&E?
SDG&E. SDG&E.
Okay, I'm only kind of kidding when I say have parties, as far as a way to identify new sources of companies that have technologies that you need to know about. You got to wade out into the ecosystem, you know, and go into places, like last week at South by Southwest Interactions, first time in the history of South by that Shell has shown up. And we had no idea what to expect. And the response we got was awesome. People scratched their heads a little bit saying, what's an oil and gas company doing at South by Interactive? We told them why we were there. And you know, we'll see what happens with the deal flow to Shell Tech Ventures as a result of anything. But there has to be a willingness to try things that you've never done before in terms of, again, wading out into the ecosystem and seeing if you can make a few ripples. But you know, it's kind of a quick, but throw parties. Have events.
We have a couple more minutes. Question? Answer.
Are you back on?
No,
How
Yes,
many of you
question.
guys
There we
have
go.
startups that are related to the energy space?
Ooh, look. Ooh, wow.
A lot. What were you hoping to learn by coming here?
Chris is accepting cards.
So for the startups here, Bartosz is the one with the money. Yes, sir.
Well, I was going to respond to the SDG&A guy. Part of the issue that you're looking at also is that there's a big difference between corporate VC versus independent sponsored VC. And those guys are out going after their point of view, and entrepreneurs understand the difference between having a fund-sponsored VC backing it versus having a corporate-sponsored VC backing it. May or may not decide to pull the plug faster than a fund-sponsored VC would. So it makes your job of origination doubly difficult, and really have a sharp point of view.
Yeah, what we try to do is we're looking more for almost like scale deployment ready, because what we want to do, we're in customer programs, and we want to put incentives and rebates and things and subsidize so the scale can happen maybe faster than it would have otherwise. So that's what we like to do, and in that process, what we do is we'll evaluate, quantitatively. We'll pay for some installations and cut, do a couple verticals like commercial office buildings and residential, whatever. And then we'll come up with some sort of work paper that says, on average, this is what we can expect to find. And then the PUC has to take the added stamp of their approval. We can actually get that process done faster than every 3 years, but still it's a process. But once we get that, then people can just turn in applications to the utility and have X minus one as their cost, right? That's in theory, but
So we don't actually have VC funding, like what you're describing. We're not allowed to do, well, let's say it's not entirely true, but
in general.
yeah, we don't take stakes in companies that we study, but we'll support the entire project. Like, you're not gonna be taking money out of your pocket to be able to test your product in the real world. We'll offer the ability to do that test.
And we do have 3 buckets of money, one where it's early stage, one where it's ready to be commercialized, and one where it's already in the market. So if you're a startup, you can participate in that early stage phase, and we help develop the product and test it.
And
Part of that whole early stage thing though is also branding also. So if you say you want to have $50 million allocated to early stage this year, is it going to be 50 next year and the year after and the year after?
That would be, we have 1.3 million per year, and it's split amongst those 3. Well, I guess we have 2 million per year basically, split between demand response and energy efficiency, and that's all the projects. That's, I don't know if it's guaranteed, but for the 3-year cycles.
it seems to repeat.
Yeah.
We have a question up here.
No, just a follow through from an entrepreneur's perspective, you know, from a scalability and getting scale of the product out, an energy efficiency project or product, you end up cannibalizing the growth if it's given to a utility a lot, because now you're going to give the product away versus going out there and creating a competitive market for that product. So a lot of entrepreneurs don't want to go that route. They'd rather go the traditional route so they can get broader scope, broader scale, and not get stuck into, you know, cannibalizing their own market.
So just to end on a positive note, would all the startup people in the room who currently have a startup, would you just raise your hand so we can just feel good to know you're out there? Holy smokes, it's amazing. Well, so now you know the answer to your question. Look at all these folks who have taken on energy as a, so thank you for coming today. Please join me in thanking the panel.